My name's Michael Williams and I'm the head of programming at the Wheeler Centre. We're very proud to be hosting tonight's event in what is possibly the most hideous theatre known to man. Now, you made a suitably enthusiastic welcome for our guest, but before I go into a lengthy introduction that is completely redundant, I'd ask you once more to join me in welcoming Sir Terry Pratchett. I don't know how you feel, Terry, but I might just ask them to applaud on and off throughout the hour, and we might leave it at that. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was in, which I think you'll agree isn't a very promising start. But luckily the word was quickly followed by a sentence, and as far as sentences go, it was an absolute cracker. In a distant and second-hand set of dimensions, in an astral plane that was never meant to fly, the curling star mists waver and part. That is, of course, the 1983 opening sentence of The Colour of Magic, the sentence that introduced the world to the Discworld novels. The many years since then have seen no end of achievements that we might, some of which we might get through in the hour or so ahead. But include such things as in excess of 65 million books sold. 37 languages is the number I could find, but it seems to be going up by the minute. There are some 38 Discworld books, and to kick us off tonight, we're going to hear a little bit from the 39th Discworld book, which none of you have at your disposal. Not one of you. So I might ask, just to get things started, Terry, could you set up the scene, set up what we're going to hear?
In the early stages of the book Thud, Commander Vimes finds himself in the countryside, a concept which is as alien to him as the far side of the moon. Commander Vimes, after all, believes that far too much fuss is made about trees, which are, in fact, as far as he is concerned, just stiff reeds. And during the course of his perambulations, he comes across what you might call a village sporting match, which only serves to stiffen his belief that everybody who lives in the countryside is either insane, no, basically insane. And he finds himself watching on the village green the game known as croquet. Over to you, Professor. This is my keen young insistent, yes, Rob. Like, can I have a day off?
I don't have that many, honestly. Hi, I'm Rob. Yeah, okay. Blimey, it really is green, isn't it? It really is. Okay, from the top. Okay, so Sam Vimes has dropped into his local country pub where he learns about a fascinating local hobby and meets an old adversary. Vimes was becoming aware that the pub was filling up, mostly with some other sons of the soil, but also with people who, whether they were gentlemen or not, would expect to be called so. They wore colourful caps and white trousers and spoke continuously. Outside, horses and carriages were filling the lane, hammering was going on somewhere, and Jiminy's wife, was now manning, or, more correctly, womaning the bar while her husband ran back and forth with his tray. Vimes looked out of the grubby window. Regrettably, the pub was that most terrifying of things, picturesque, which meant that the windows consisted of small round panes fixed in place with lead. They were for letting light in, not for looking out of, since they bent light so erratically that it nearly broke. One pane showed what was probably a sheep, but when you looked at it, actually, it perhaps was more like a whale. until it moved when it became a mushroom. A man walked past with no head until he reached another pane and then had one enormous eyeball. Young Sam would have loved it, but his father decided to give it eventual blindness a miss and stepped out into the sunshine. Ah, he thought, some kind of game. Oh well. Vimes wasn't keen on games because they led to crowds, and crowds led to work for coppers. But here, in fact, he wasn't a copper, was he? It was a strange feeling, so he left the pub and became an innocent bystander. He couldn't remember when he'd been one before. It felt vulnerable. He strolled over to the nearest man who was hammering some stakes into the ground and asked, "What's going on here then?" Realising that he'd spoken in copper rather than in ordinary citizen, he added, "If you don't mind me asking." The man straightened up. He was one of the ones with the colourful caps. "Haven't you ever seen a game of croquet, sir? It's a game of games." Mr. Civilian Vimes did his best to look like a man eager for more delicious information. Judging by his informant's enthusiastic grin, he was about to learn the rules of croquet, whether or not he wanted to. Well, he thought, I did ask. "At first sight, sir, croquet might seem just like another ball game, wherein two sides strive against one another by endeavouring to propel the ball by hand or bat or other device into the opponent's goal of some sort. Croquet, however, was invented during a game of croquet at St. Onan's Theological College in Ham-on-Rye, when the novice priest Jackson Fieldfare, now the Bishop of Quirm, took his mallet in both hands, and instead of giving the ball a gentle tap, ... After that, Vimes gave up. Not only because the rules of the game were incomprehensible in their own right, but also because the extremely enthusiastic young man allowed his enthusiasm to overtake any consideration of the need to explain things in some sensible order, which meant that the flood of information was continually punctuated by apologetic comments on the lines of, "Oh, I am sorry, I should have explained earlier that a second cone is not allowed more than once per exchange, and in normal play, there's only one tump, unless, of course, you're talking about royal croquet." Vimes died. And the sun dropped out of the sky. Giant lizards took over the world, the stars exploded and went out, and all hope vanished with a gurgle into the sink trap of oblivion. And the gas filled the firmament and combusted, and behold, there was a new heaven, one careful owner, and a new disk, and Io, and possibly, verily, life crawled out of the sea, or possibly didn't because it had been made by the gods. That was really up to the bystander. And lizards turned into less scaly lizards, or possibly they didn't. And lizards turned into birds, and worms turned into butterflies, and a species of apple turned into bananas. And possibly a kind of monkey fell out of a tree and realised that life was better when you didn't have to spend your time hanging on to something, and only in a few million years evolved trousers and ornamental stripy hats, and lastly, the game of croquet. And there, magically reincarnated, was Vimes, a little dizzy, standing on the village green, looking into the smiling countenance of an enthusiast. He managed to say, "Well, that's amazing. Thank you so very much. I look forward to enjoying the game." At which point he thought a brisk walk home might be in order, only to be foiled by a regrettably familiar voice behind him saying, "You, I say you, aren't you Vimes?" It was Lord Rust, usually of Ankh-Morpork and a fierce old warhorse without whose unique grasp of strategy and tactics several wars would not have been so bloodily won. Now he was in a wheelchair, a newfangled variety pushed by a man whose life was, knowing his lordship, quite probably unbearable. But hatred tends not to have a long half-life, and in recent years, Vimes had regarded the man as now no more than a titled idiot, rendered helpless by old age, yet still possessed of an annoying horsey voice that, suitably harnessed, might be used to saw down trees. Lord Rust was not a problem anymore. There were surely only a few more years to go before he would rust in peace, and somewhere in his knobbly heart, Vimes still retained a slight admiration for the cantankerous old butcher, with his evergreen self-esteem and absolute readiness not to change his mind about anything at all. The old boy had reacted to the fact that Vimes, the hated policeman, was now a duke, and therefore a lot more knobby than he was. By simply assuming that this could not possibly be true, and therefore he totally ignored it. So Lord Rust, in Vimes's book, was a dangerous buffoon, but, and here was the difficult bit, an incredibly, if not suicidally brave one. This would have been absolutely tickety-boo were it not for the suicides of those poor fools who followed him into battle. Witnesses had said that it was uncanny. Rust would gallop into the jaws of death at the head of his men and was never seen to flinch. Yet arrows and morning stars always missed him while invariably hitting the men right behind him. Bystanders, or rather people peering at the battle from behind comfortably large rocks, testified to this. Perhaps he was capable of ignoring, too, the arrows meant for him. But age could not be so easily upstaged, and the old man, while no less arrogant, had a sunken look. Rust, most unusually, smiled at Vimes and said, "First time I've ever seen you down here, Vimes. Is Sybil going back to her roots? What?" "She wants young Sam to get some mud on his boots, Rust." "Well done her. What?" "It'll do the boy good and make a man of him. What?" Vimes never understood where the explosive "what" came from. After all, he thought, what's the point of just barking out "what" excuse me, for absolutely no discernible reason? And as for what? Well, what was that all about? What seemed to be the tent pegged hammered into the conversation. But what the hell for? What? "So, not down here on any official business then, what?" said Rust. Vimes's mind spun so quickly that Rush should have heard the wheels go round. It analysed the tone of voice, the look of the man, the slight, ever so slight, but nevertheless perceptible, hint of hope that the answer would be no, and presented him with the suggestion that it might not be a bad idea to drop a tiny kitten among the pigeons. He laughed. "Well, Rust, Sybil has been banging on about coming down here since young Sam was born, and this year she put her foot down, and I suppose an order from his wife must be considered official. When?" Vimes saw the man. Vimes saw the man who pushed the enormous wheelchair trying to conceal a smile, especially when Rust responded with a baffled, "What?" Vimes decided not to go with "where?" and instead said, in an offhand way, "Well, you know how it is, Lord Rust. A policeman will find a crime anywhere if he decides to look hard enough." Lord Rust's smile remained, but it had congealed slightly as he said, "I should listen to the advice of your good lady, Vimes. I don't think you'll find anything worth your mettle down here." There was no what to follow, and the lack of it was somehow an emphasis. There you go.
I can't help but think that you chose a passage of Lord Rust to punish Rob in some obscure way, to make him have to say "what" that many times in a short space of time. But look, that passage, apart from whetting our appetite for snuff, which comes out, I believe, in October, summed up something that seems central to me about the Discworld books, which is your enduring belief in the importance of the laws of narrative. If a policeman goes to a country estate...
Oh, my word, yes. Look at, I mean, why didn't someone shoot Hercule Poirot? I also just go and take a nice stroll. 3 people die. Who is the number one suspect? I think not.
Does that mean that we can divine, as readers of your books, that at some point he's going to be standing in a drawing room, Commander Vimes pointing his finger at a likely suspect?
No.
Why am I not surprised to find you zig when you could zag?
Oh, yes, quite so.
Tell me a bit about the importance of the laws of narrative, because through all the Discworld books, not just the Guards books, although it definitely features there, your characters are very aware of the importance of story.
Indeed, they are characters of story, but at the same time understand it. And I have to say that one of my warmest recollections was after the publication of The Amazing Morris and His Educated Rodents. an American woman contacted me, and she said she was reading to her little girl on her lap, and there was a very gruesome bit in it where rats are fighting one another and bad things are happening, and she thought this was really over the top and she couldn't bear to read it. And her little daughter, who was 7, patted her on the knee and said, "It's okay, Mum. It'll all come out good in eventually," you know, or something like that. It will all not have happened. And she had this in, and so already the child had learned about a narrative inevitability, that the bad guys are going to win. To lose. Lose is what they're going to do. Lose. So it's been a long day. And she was absolutely certain that justice would unfold. And so young and so likely to be disappointed in later years.
One of the tendencies of reviewers of your books is to point out the way in which they get progressively darker, that the early ones are much broader comic novels.
I prefer more realistic.
Does your tendency towards heroes and heroines who are a little more jaded, does that reflect your own worldview?
I think it's the world's worldview. I mean, one of my recent heroes was Pepe, the somewhat louche designer of Shatar. There's a name waiting for a misprint. The dwarf fashion house, and he is a vicious. He's as gay as a tree full of monkeys, but knows how to flourish a really sharp stiletto when he wishes to. And I think in that particular book, in Unseen Academicals, I think probably occasionally people cheered him on.
I don't think there's any occasionally about it. Every time it's on the page. There's something very exciting about that in a book like Unseen Academicals, which is, notwithstanding the Tiffany Aching books, the most recent Discworld novel,
Right, yeah.
That not only do you return to old friends, like the Wizards and Unseen University, but you also introduce some new characters that I could easily imagine spawning 18 books of their own, from Pepe to Glenda Sugarbeam.
Yeah.
Do you find the world expanding?
In fact, can I just, because it's like me to do this, they are not new friends, they are old friends, because they arrive as old friends. Pepe is only to be there for a couple of sentences when we feel we know him, that we've seen him, that we have an old mate, rather suspect in the loo, who's very much like Pepe. And as for Glenda Sugarbeam, you'll find ladies like her everywhere. You know, never got on at school, mucked about, suddenly found at the age of about 25 that she had a Class 1 brain on her shoulders. And although Nut, I suppose, was the official hero, she was absolutely, I think, the heroine. Because in many ways she drove events, and I just loved her finding out that she really had worth and purpose, and it was great fun to write. But you see, and that's what I should be doing. As I always say, you can write a nice piece like that, but add one lousy dragon, and they call you a fantasy writer. There's very little in Unseen Academicals that is fantasy. Indeed, there is very little in my books that is fantasy in the wizards and warlocks way.
Yeah, your wizards would be familiar to anyone who spent any time in a university anywhere.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes.
But there's a certain magic to the nature of their cheese trolley, perhaps, so we have to allow for that.
Sorry, the acoustics in here, I have to tell you, they are hearing us in FM. You, I'm hearing in AM.
It's unfortunately, that's my mode, is AM. It's default. It's a terrible position. I'll try and speak up.
Yes, what did you say?
So, your point about new characters immediately feeling old.
No, a feeling that you have known them, familiar.
Some 38 or 39 books ago, presumably you didn't imagine you were creating a world that you were going to return to again and again and again.
No, of course not. No, I'd have cut my wrists. I mean, I do other stuff, and I'm very proud of Nation, for example, but to find yourself really barreling along in a Discworld book is like coming home to a nice warm blanket. And then suddenly you are disturbed by the need to put some kind of plot in there as well.
Did you, looking back at those early books though, did you set up rules for the Discworld or facts of the Discworld that you now regret? Did you write yourself into a corner?
The arena in which I write is circular. No corners allowed. You cannot change what goes past. There was a fat patrician first, and now there is a much, much better patrician that isn't so fat, but the first one was written by a less apt writer. I don't know. I mean, when it comes down to it, I haven't got the foggiest idea how it works. I mean, what I always say is, at school, I was... Art Buchwald once said that in every gang, you're going to find the writer. There's going to be the thug at the top, and two lesser thugs, lieutenants jostling for position, and then a few hangers-on, and then there'd be the writer. The smart kid who's a bit small and a bit weak, but can come up with jokes and good nicknames and that sort of stuff. And by doing that, he earns his place in the gang. And so at school, that's how I did scurrilous pictures of the teachers and a whole thing about trolls, I remember. And looking back on it, I was thinking the other day, because all these old school books went into the attic and go where such things go when your mum cleans everything up. And I had a whole sequence which the lads followed, and it was about a little race of little people called the clay hangers, who were Welsh, oddly enough. And there was a whole slew of weird characters with names like Muggsy Nails, who was an escaped convict. And, the big pianist. He was a slightly smudged pianist. So instead of being a big pianist, he was a big pianist who had a run-in with a man with a ventriloquist's apt. And all this, it was all kind of weird shit. But now I realise that as it was flying past, it was bits of it were knocking out a piece of brain now and again, and they came up. They came up later in a book. I mean, I did a whole little drawn series about trolls, because I've always been on the side of the trolls. I've always been on the side of the things which aren't beautiful, like elephants and tortoises and trolls. My wife, on the other hand, is a beauty of no ill repute. I just wanted to put that in so no one would jump to...
There was a real danger of being taken out of context.
There was, yes. I kind of wasted my time at school, but I wasted my time very, very fruitfully.
How much was journalism an extension of wasting your time at school fruitfully?
Actually, think of this as what was the rock opera that had Pinball Wizard in it? Tommy. Well, it was like a kind of Tommy type thing. You learn different things in different circumstances, and when I left school, I was thrown into and I ran away from school, as you probably know. I was thrown into real life because journalism is real life, and I saw my first corpse on the first day at work. You know. Education meant something in those days. And I'd sit in one of the things that the local journalists had to do was cover the coroner's courts and the various criminal minor courts in the area, and just write things down. And it seemed to me that we never, ever got to the truth. So there was this kid, and he'd beaten up some bloke and stolen his money. And there was the kid standing there, wearing the first new suit he's ever had. And there's his mum. And you think, where did this story start? How far because you look at him and he looks like any other kid, and you think, I'm just writing down a chapter because something happened a long time ago. And then it ends up with this kid beating up some guy. And it made me restless about journalism because whatever you got was only a shadow of the truth. You just had enough truth for the clerk to write down and nail that as what happened. Whereas perhaps the greatest crime may have taken place long before the boy had been born. But you could never track down the universe. And that's why I went into features, because at least you had room to draw breath. And so from that, I was already writing on the side and indeed selling many short stories, but with features, I did very well. I remember I was working in a newspaper in which one was it? In Bristol, and NASA died. Remember NASA? And the editor put his face round the door and said, anyone know anything about NASA? We've got to have about 40 words in the next 15 minutes. And I volunteered. I knew bugger all about NASA. But I had the journalistic talent of watching the television while at the same time going through the press cuttings, having a bit of a think, taking a jolly good stab at it, and then writing what was actually a very, very good obituary of NASA. Heaven knows why. It was all smoke and mirrors. But when the smoke blew away, the mirrors were still there.
You're a Wikipedia journalist ahead of your time.
Yes. Yeah.
So, leaving journalism behind, do you find in your new mode, not so new now, as a novelist, that you feel closer to being able to write about the truth?
Yes, I think sometimes. But you have to stir it in, because the truth, as we know, is not very palatable. Any truth, more or less.
So it's a balancing act between truth and story.
Yes, and truth and consequences. No, I don't really set out to do anything but to get readers to read the next book. But somehow seriousness trickles under the door.
Can't keep it out. I'm going to ask for a show of hands from the audience, because I think any fans of Sir Terry's work will be divided. I want a show of hands for people for whom the watch books are their favourites amongst the Discworld. Now the Witches. Tiffany Aking. Excellent. See, the indecision is now breaking in. And what about Death and Susan Stowe-Hewlett? I've never seen such an evenly divided crowd, even allowing for that woman there who put her hand up every time.
Well, put it like this, you see, Discworld is like drugs. Because when you can't get Coke, you're going to get good old cannabis. And when you can't get cannabis, you'll lick the outside of a dead rhinoceros. So any Discworld is better than no Discworld. Now, and yet, among my favourite Discworld books is Monstrous Regiment. And I liked that because I had to work on it. And had to go and do a bit of research in a nice little place in London, run by ladies who like other ladies very much indeed. And I did an awful lot of the best kind of research which probably is never going to take you anywhere, but it's so much fun to do, like how it's possible to piss standing up. And the famous invention of the first of all initially the leather trumpet and then the silver one for ladies of high birth, and some truths about our ancestors, which was around about the time of the Peninsular Wars. People very rarely saw anyone else without any clothes on. You might find that surprising, but people almost even used to bathe with some kind of shift on.
Sounds like my time at university, to be honest.
Well, they just didn't bathe. And I learned a lot of other things, like how many women actually fought in the Civil War as men, and how that gradually happened. And there was one beautiful thing I came across about a hellish driver, a stagecoach driver in the Old West, who was renowned for her crassness in dealing with people who tried to rob the stage and things like that. And she was a very good stagecoach driver, but none of the men ever found out she was. And when a doctor examined her when she died, they found that good old Bill had at least one child. A lot of that sort of thing used to happen in the Old West because that was the New World indeed. But think of it. Have you ever seen pictures of Annie Oakley? Well, they thought she was a looker. That just shows what it was like in the Old West. And this was all done for my own fun, really, but some of this filtered through into the book, and that's where Jackrum came from. And subsequently, when I was still researching for the fun of it, I found that in Holland at one point there was a woman who had reached, I think it was the position of sergeant, and she made it her duty to look out for other runaway girls to put them on the right lines. So Jackrum, more or less, really existed. You have to like to read obscure books. And indeed, ladies who like ladies very much in small places in London.
I was going to say, as a fan of your books, I, as a teenager, bought a copy of Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable on your recommendation on the front cover. How important is book research versus people research?
People research is the best research of all. I mean, when I was a young journalist, I used to have to... The whole thing about being a journalist is you have to be able to speak to people. And you have to speak all languages of people. And I don't mean sort of Swahili or something like that. Slightly upper class, middle class, lower class. And I remember we used to cover golden weddings and things like that in those days. And I was writing down, I was chatting to this Darby and Joan couple. And then I think the wife said, "But we had sex, you know." And then the next thing that the husband, "Oh, it's amazing what you could do on a bicycle in those days." I have to say, my imagination didn't have far to run on that one. But then, as I often tell people, another similar occasion, I was talking to a very, very elderly lady who had once been a district nurse, I think probably in the 1920s or earlier. She was very, very old, and she told me that she had killed 2 people. I forget about one of them, but the other one was a man who was dying of cancer and screaming his way to death. And there was not the kind of medication or indeed understanding as we have now. And she and his wife put pillows on his head and sat on them until he died. Because his screams were waking up the village. And that's the truth as well.
The last Tiffany Aching book, or you've described it as the last one, the most recent one.
It's the last one in which she can appear in... The next one I do would have to be would have to be an adult book with Tiffany Aching in it. Because you can't play too many games with this. I grew her, as it were, through the series. But now she is, by the standards of her culture, a grown woman.
The opening of that book has, as many of your books with witches, both old and young, do, some beautiful writing about death that seems to come almost from that story that you just told. That question of compassion that Granny Weatherwax is always very good at. I think, I could have this wrong, I'm sorry, it's in Carpe Jugulum where she has to choose between a mother and a child and which one she'll live.
Yeah.
And she says to the midwife who's there, who wants the husband to get the choice, "What's he ever done to you? Why would you make him go through that?" How much does writing about death as a character free you up to be very steely-eyed about stuff that often isn't dealt with in comic fiction?
It's never occurred to me not to do it, if you see what I mean. And it also, for want of a better way of putting it, it's good copy. I mean, it is fresh stuff because we don't talk about it, but we know about it. I mean, I very much enjoyed writing, gruesome though it was, the bit in I Shall Wear Midnight where Tiffany is trying to explain to her father what it is she has to do, much to his horror, and she tells him about the old woman who died alone with her cats. And the kittens with the beautiful blue eyes, which were very difficult to get rid of. That is actually, although heaven knows elderly people found dead and in the early stages of decomposition in their beds are not that unusual. But the story itself owes something to the story of Mary Provost. Have you heard of her?
No.
Mary Provost didn't look her best. No, how did it go? I know the Mary Provost was a real star of the movies, but they were the talkies. When the talkies came in, she had to retire because she had a voice like a bandsaw. And she lived all by herself in Hollywood West with her little doggie who loved her very much. And one day she died. Fill in the rest for yourselves, boys and girls. But apparently when the police broke in, the dog had such a sorrowful look on its face, like, what else was I to do? See you on the dark side.
Not for nothing, you talked about as one of the world's finest comic novelists with a morbid outlook like that. That's a sensational
It's not morbid.
balance.
Again, it's the truth. It's the truth. And that's the thing. It is part of what happens among humans.
You've never had, as best as I can remember, death visit one of your kind of central characters.
I know where
once
my
and for all.
bread is buttered, mate. Yeah.
The
day I lay a finger on Sam Vimes, I'm a dead man.
I think that's unanimous agreement. But say, Cohen the Barbarian is getting on in years. You're not tempted to have him?
Cohen the Barbarian, old chum, is dead.
Oh, I've missed the last hero, and that's what happens to me. There's spoiler alert. You've upset me now.
Well, you did actually get it wrong in front of so many learned people.
That is mortifying, and I'm never going to come back from that, which is why we are going to throw to audience questions in a moment, because you wouldn't make a mistake as embarrassing as the one that I just made. Now, there is a microphone in the middle on the top floor, and there is one in the middle on the ground floor here. So you need to make your way in an orderly fashion to that microphone to get to ask some questions. But I'm going to attempt to save face with another question now, very quickly. And that question is about how...
Just a moment. You're doing better than most.
I'm sure I can fix that. Just like Commander Vimes, you appear to have increasingly grandiose and absurd titles being added to your name. An officer of the Order of British Empire is not bad, even if it's more often known as an OBE. And now you're Sir Terry Pratchett. Has it changed?
Professor Sir Terry Pratchett.
Sorry, it's only a matter of time before you're the Right Honourable Professor Sir Terry Pratchett.
No, I doubt very much that is ever going to be the case.
Has the level of fame and adoration that you get now changed your experience as a writer?
There are some parts in Snuff, and also earlier in Vimes' series, about he kind of wonders how he got there, because he was a kid from the streets. Now I was a kid from the lanes, which were much healthier places to be. But we lived in a cottage which you could enter in a Monty Python game, You had no roof, no floor, no walls, luxury. But it had built into it part of Discworld. Nanny Ogg's tin bath was on our wall. Nanny Ogg clipping her toenails in the bath was my dad once upon a time. As a little kid, watching these boomerangs go across, wondering why they didn't come back to strike him. And the old Elson toilet. Of course, I suppose that's all you guys have got in Australia, but where it was all week. You crapped into this tin can with a touch of deodorant in it, and then on Saturday, one of my dad's chores was to dig a big hole and tip it all in. And next summer we would have the biggest, most tasty tomatoes that you've ever had. And no one ever got sick. So what I said in my inaugural lecture at Trinity was that when you're an author, the black mill enters your head. There's another you that watches you. So all experience that you have is grist for the black mill. You're comforting your mother because your father is dead, and the bit of you that is in the black mill is saying, this is what it looks like what it seems like to comfort your mother when your father is dead. And this is then lodged into the library somewhere. And it's kind of shameful, but you can't help it. I mean, that's why, and from out of that feeling comes a lot of Tiffany aching, where she has first thoughts and second thoughts and third thoughts and possibly fourth thoughts, which think what the other thinks about what the other thinks about the way they think about thinking.
I can see a queue forming here in the middle. So rather than indulge myself and continue to ask questions, the gentleman in the middle, mindful that there are about 1,000 people directly behind you, if you could keep it on the pithy side, we'd all be grateful.
I'll be very quick. Sorry, quite loud. I've always felt while reading the Vimes-centred books that although Vimes is not Terry Pratchett, through Vimes we probably most clearly hear the voice of Terry Pratchett. Do you think this is true? This is the impression that I get while reading them. How do you react to that idea?
You are probably right. But to an extent, so does Tiffany aching. And sometimes even Rincewind, for heaven's sake. I think I channel them. And it actually does work like that. You can pick the character for the book you want to write. And that is the voice. The nice thing about doing it like this is that once you have Tiffany aching, once you have Vimes, they drive the plot. You know, stick Vimes in the middle of a murder or a terrible theft or whatever. You've just wound up the elastic and away he goes. And the same with Tiffany. There are a range of ways in which they can act, but they will act in those ways. I mean, I rather fell in love with Tiffany because she just got on with the job the whole time. It didn't matter what went wrong. She wasn't really in the blame game, and above everything else, she gave me the opportunity to write the line, above her she saw what the prisoner calls the sky, but what she intended to call the exit. And I was rather like that. And I like the way I very much like the way she handled things in I Shall Wear Midnight. And I cherished the anger that melted flint at the end. You know, as an instrument for me to play on, I think she was one of my best, better than Granny Weatherwax, who I think she now surpasses. But still doesn't have that long-term wisdom that Granny has. That was a very nice question.
Nice question, nice answer. Just before we go to the next question, just an extension of that, if through your characters we can know a bit of what you think, is it right to divine that you're a bit of a fan of tyranny then?
Well, you see, has anyone seen this scorpion pit?
Does there need to be one?
Well, Well, that's the whole point. You got it in a nutshell. Veterinary has a metaphorical scorpion print, and he, as it were, positions it in the mind of the people, so that he doesn't have to go. I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, they're very hard to keep underground, and they need feeding, you know. And I mean, the whole point, you throw them in the scorpion pit. What have you done? You've now just crushed half a dozen pride scorpions. It just doesn't work.
Fair enough. We might go up to the top for the next one, so we're going up closer to the hideous green ceiling for the next question.
So Terry, I spent an unforgettable 14 hours in a situation not dissimilar to the nurse you described earlier with my father, which I would not have gotten through without Granny Weatherwax's example, so I wanted to say thank you for that. Okay. But my question is, now that Rihanna's done with Heavenly Sword and Mirror's Edge, is she working on the Nation game, and if not, why not?
I'm sure you guys know about the project which has, I have to say, the unofficial label of CSI Ankh-Morpork. Rihanna will be working with the guys. So that means I've got a, you know, I believe in family. That's how I clean my teeth, you know. And she's already done a CSI thing for one of the things she's done, and she knows how I think, and I know how she thinks pretty much. And I always said if she ever wanted to do Discworld when I'm gone, and she said, well, that's kind of you, in an unkind kind of way. And it's going to be fun, because if you can't have a lot of fun with a fantasy police force, then where can you have fun? Well, I actually can think of a lot of places, but it's going to be very good, I think.
For those who are unaware of a TV adaptation based around the Guards books, I'd ask you just to talk amongst yourselves when you leave this theatre to try and decide who is humanly capable of playing Nobby Nobbs. And if you can answer that, you're a better person than I am.
Well, Nobbyism is a state of mind, you know. The guy who played Nobby Nobbs in Hogfather had it absolutely right. Because although Nobby Nobbs is, well, Nobby Nobbs, he's quite proud of his knobbiness.
We'll take the question from the woman down here.
So, Terry, thank you very much for your gifts of creativity and imagination. And I also want to thank you for the strength of your voice in talking about death and assisted suicide. I'm on the committee of the Victorian organisation Dying with Dignity, and we're working towards law reform to enable, legally, physician-assisted dying.
Oh, yes. Such as they have, for example, in Switzerland, and in Holland, and in Belgium.
And in Oregon.
And in some parts of... And I think there's another state that's gone. I thought Washington State was doing it now.
That they have, and Oregon State too. I heard your interview with Ramona Koval this morning, in which you, talking about assisted suicide, said to her, what are you doing? And I love that, and I want to ask you, what should we be doing? We here.
Well, here is the thing, and I'll deal with this because I've been talking so much about it, but there's not much to laugh about, although I bet there'll be a laugh before the end of the exposition. The opponents of assisted dying, and by which I mean people who are possessed of a very bad and incurable illness, and who, of their own free will, asked to die, come up with all kinds of arguments against it, of how it can go wrong. And they are and as I said to a journalist earlier today, the trouble with the press is that it believes in balance, and that's fine. People like me talk about assisted dying, and we explain things and go through things and point out that it's done here and so forth, and these are the things, this is how it's done, and they nod, and then they go to see the people who are on the other side, who say, and this is really true, death squads. And I met a journalist that said that, and I said, when I talk about something like assisted dying, I expect journalists to pummel me a bit, to get the facts out so that I'm on my toes. But I expect that the other side should be pummeled a bit. And I said, why did you say to the person, exactly how do you think that a modern, stable democracy goes from assisted suicide to the burning of elderly ladies in the furnace, which is what death squads would appear to mean? Why, did you not ask the person to clarify that? And I said, oh, well, no. And I thought, you don't deserve to be a journalist. And the press seemed to cower away from actually asking those questions, as if you shouldn't, because God might be in there somewhere, and he wouldn't like it very much. There's my laugh. And so, I would like parity of interrogation. Both sides should be asked to explain exactly what they mean. And as I say, several perfectly decent democracies, not known for being stupid or unkind, have been running assisted death for some time now. And I think the Holland and Belgian version is a very good one. So what you should do about it, you should say to the government, why are you holding out against this? And the moment they mention God, then you should actually revolt. Because let me be quite clear. I've spent quite a lot of money recently helping to renovate a small church near where I live. And I get on very well with the Christians there. And the Church of England, well, I don't go to any church at all and never have done, but the church I don't go to is the Church of England. I wouldn't not go to any other church. Because I kind of like, because I was looking at the guys coming out of it one time, and I thought, I think I know why I like these people. What they have discovered is what I call Jesus light, which is this. My dad seemed to think like this. Jesus, decent bloke, said a lot of good things, look after other people, look after your parents, don't steal, and generally be a good citizen. And in this he was echoing wise men of every culture, speaking in, as it were, slightly different ways, all through history. And they have the people who believe in what I call Jesus light grasp that, even if they don't think of it like that, and live their lives like that, like my parents did. And they know that we should be excellent to one another. which actually, a phrase which uttered by a couple of mop heads actually is well within the tradition. I'm not certain about playing the guitar, but being excellent with one another is okay. And people are happy with that. What they don't like is God used as a hammer, God telling you shouldn't do this. I don't know what the position is with homosexuality here. Heavens, Betsy, I've been to the Mardi Gras, along with the bloke that didn't understand exactly how it worked. Yeah? Some of these Australians, big girls, aren't they? And the thing is that when I was a kid, a big fuss was made about homosexuals, and up to for quite a long time. Now you can't move for the buggers, and it doesn't matter, because they wander around like real people, and nothing happens. They keep themselves to themselves, as it were, and you cannot work in the entertainment industry and not get on with gays. And what happens is the world always cleans itself up, and the generations stream away, and so there are changes. And a generation is growing up which homosexuality is something that happens. It's normal, and yesterday was normal, and yesterday goes on being normal, and a bit at a time. And I think I say this in one of the books in the stories. Yes, it's to do with Coombe Valley. As the days pass, being normal, so they become normal, and people think, they did that in those days. And then of course it's whether we can make love to our dogs after. We're going to have to work our way through the whole thing. But I must confess that one of the real heartwarming things I had recently, in the last few years, there was a lot of problems when lots of Polish plumbers were coming over to do jobs in the country, because all our plumbers were far too posh to actually get down there and put new sink traps in. And there was a guy, don't exactly know what part of the Indian subcontinent he came from. This was in Birmingham, and he certainly had a turban. And he said, "I don't like this," and he said it in a Brummy voice, which I cannot do. "I don't like these foreigners coming over here taking our jobs." And I thought, hallelujah, or Krishna be praised, as you like. You've learnt how to be an Englishman. And for that matter, an Australian. Yeah, hate all the ones that were here before you, and hate all the ones that came afterwards.
I was very nervous there. You followed the words "making love to your dog" with the words "I must confess." There was a train of thought there that had me deeply concerned. Now, I can see a queue of people waiting, but I'm going to be quite hardline about this. There's going to be one more question from the top and one from the bottom. So you need to fight amongst yourselves down the bottom. And we'll take the question from the young man upstairs.
Sir Terry Pratchett, I would like to ask you, how old were you when you wrote your first book?
How I wrote it?
How old were you?
How old was it? The first book? 17. I was a slow starter. And it was, I got a job on the local paper, as you know. And if you were the new kid, you had to do the children's corner. which wasn't done very well. And I wrote these little stories, and one of which became The Carpet People. In fact, in the evenings, I would be writing The Carpet People, as it were, big, and then subbing it down to fit it in a story format in the newspaper. It's a very collectible item now. And that's it. That's how I did it. And as I always say, the one reason was that I read all the best writers. All the best writers in the English language between, I think, the mid-Victorian era and the 1960s. And you learn by watching, I was going to say, you learn by watching the masters, which I suppose would also help.
And the final question, no pressure, but this is the final question.
Will the Discworld ever have a steam-powered industrial revolution?
I'm in two minds about that. You see, it already has electricity, even erratically, from the Igors. The Duke of Wellington once famously said, "I don't like the railways. They allow the poor people to move about." I don't know. On the other hand, isn't steam wonderful? Especially if you had a sort of Trevithick's, steam, the real, big kettle, or Granny's kettle on wheels, and you could have some fun with that. But then it would put all the golems out of business. And I don't know, and it's as simple as that. And
Thank you for the question. I'm going to, like you, I can't resist a question about the inevitable nature of change. And it seems to me, even though you have fairy tales in the Discworld, and you have Goatburger, the publisher, publishing The Joy of Snacks and the Almanac, I can't think of the existence of any novelists on the Discworld. Is there no room for one?
No. Well, some are hinted at occasionally. And of course, there are, certainly in snuff, there is a lady writer. I think that's it. But no, that's it.
We'll see if the lady writer is partly yourself. I resisted the urge to ask what happened to Mr. Hong when he tried to open the 3 Jolly Luck takeaway fish.
That's one of the perennial ones, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, and it's always good to end on a perennial. I'll ask you to please join me in thanking Sir Terry Pratchett.